We are over in the book of Hebrews tonight, where we've been all year this year on Wednesday evenings, and we are over in the 12th chapter. We're going to take the first 6 verses of chapter 12 tonight over in the book of Hebrews. Here we go with our little background as we do every week. Hebrews is written to these Jewish Christians who are on the border of actually thinking about going back to the old way of doing things, going back to the old law, going back to the old regulations. And the author of Hebrews has been systematically showing them that they don't need to do that, that that has been replaced, that they have complete sufficiency in Christ and all that He has done. The first 8 chapters we saw where the author took it apart, talking about how Jesus is greater than all of these other things. The 9th chapter we saw where he talked about the separation between the old covenant and the new covenant. The 10th chapter he talked about the sacrifices of the old covenant versus the sacrifice of Jesus Christ as the one full and final sacrifice. And then chapter 11 that we finished up last week, we spent a few weeks in there. Chapter 11 in the book of Hebrews, known as the Faith Hall of Fame. And we went through that chapter, spent some time in there looking at all of these different greats of the Old Testament and the faith that they had. So we're going to start chapter 12 tonight, and I'm looking at this and I noticed that I did not change. I hope I changed the rest of my slides. I did, because that's the wrong passage up there. That's last week's passage. Tonight we're going to start in chapter 12. Don't pay any attention to what's on the screen right now. We're going to start in chapter 12. We're going to read the first 6 verses of chapter 12, okay? So Hebrews chapter 12, starting in the first verse. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest ye become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. So we're going to go through these 6 verses this evening and take a look at them. There's some interesting things going on here. There's a whole lot going on in these 6 verses, to tell you the truth. So we're going to start with this first verse, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on the first couple verses, to be honest with you. The first verse, therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Now, anytime you see the word therefore somewhere, it is a direct reference to what they just finished talking about. Here it is in the case of the list of faith that we saw in chapter 11. He's went all the way through chapter 11 talking about all of these greats of faith. We get to chapter 12 and he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And I've often thought to myself, especially in places like this, they didn't ask my opinion and they didn't ask me to be on the council that sat down and divided the Bible up by chapter and verse. When they did that, had it been up to me, the first couple verses of chapter 12 would have actually been back there with chapter 11. But they did that. So here we go, the first verse. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Now, that word surrounded is exactly what it sounds like in the Greek. To be all around, to be encircled, to be encompassed, to be surrounded. And then the word witness there is a little bit different. To bear witness or to give testimony. Witness means a lot of things in the Greek. There's several different versions of the word witness, and it means a lot of different things. In this particular instance, it means to bear witness and to give testimony. So really what we're looking at here is we have all of these who have come before and have bore witness to God through their faith. They really have. They have shown their testimony through the faith that they lived. And we're surrounded by all of it. And that's what he's telling these Jewish Christians. Therefore, we're surrounded by this cloud of all of these greats in faith. And they have testified to God through the faith that they lived. And actually, Hebrews 11, 1 and 2 starts out with that. If you want to look back to Hebrews chapter 11 at the very beginning of it when he talks about what faith is. Hebrews chapter 11, starting verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. And that is basically the same word that's used over there, that testimony. By them they were commended, the New International Version says. But it takes us right back to that word that's back there, witness, that they bore testimony. So, that first verse, he says, since we're surrounded by this cloud of these greats of faith, whose testimony was shown through the faith that they lived, he said, let us lay aside every weight. We have all of these that we have looked at. We're surrounded by all of these greats. We stand on the shoulders of these people who had all of this great faith. And since we know that, let us lay aside every weight. Now that word lay aside there, that statement lay aside, it literally in the Greek means to throw off, cast off, strip off, or to remove. To just get rid of it. And let me get over there. Anything that weighs us down in our walk with Christ needs to be removed. Anything that weighs us down, that's going to make us less, that pulls us back, that pulls us away, anything that we have there really needs to be removed. Now in its context, remember we're real big on context. I always say what's my favorite three words, context, context, context. So in its context, remember this letter is being written to these Jewish Christians who are thinking about going back to the law. So what is the weight that he's talking about that they've got? The law. He's talking about the law to them in its context. You know, throw away this law. You're thinking of, and he actually talks about that earlier in Hebrews 2, you're thinking of binding yourself down again. You're thinking of weighing yourself down. You're thinking about going back to that because you think Christ wasn't sufficient for what he came to do, but he was. You need to cast that off. Well, that's great in its context, but when it comes down to it, like I said earlier, it can be anything to us 2,000 years later that weighs us down and drags us away from Christ. And when you think about it, there's a lot of things out there that can do that, can't they? I mean, our jobs can, our hobbies can, our relationships can. There's a lot of things that can weigh us down. And I was telling Craig before class tonight, we were talking about how you can read the Bible, and we've talked about this so many times, and I've mentioned it so many times too. How you can read the Bible so many times and for so long, so many years, and see something that you hadn't ever seen before, or have something click that had never clicked before. This is one of those verses for me. When I was preparing this lesson this week over in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, I have preached a lot of sermons on this little passage right here. Therefore, we also, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily entangles us. Every time I preached a sermon on that, I've always talked about us laying aside and getting rid of the weight of sin. But you know what? He's talking about two things here. He's talking about the things that weigh us down. And then there's a little three-letter word tucked in there that I have zipped past every time. And the sin that so easily entangles. Listen, a job in and of itself is not sinful, is it? It's not sinful to have a job. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that feel like that. But no, it's not sinful to have a job. Hobbies, in and of themselves, that's not sinful, is it? I mean,
only if it takes a place of your worship to God and you're trying to walk your life as Christ.
That's right. If it becomes an idol,
Yes.
which jobs can become an idol, hobbies can become an idol, relationships can become an idol. Anything can replace Christ in our life. When that happens, then it becomes a sin. But if we see that happen, if we see that something is weighing us down, bogging us down, and pulling us away, the author of Hebrews says, listen, you got to strip it off, you got to cast it away, you got to throw it to the side, you've got to get this weight off of you. So we got to get rid of that weight. Look in your Bibles over to the book of Luke. Look over to Luke chapter 9. I didn't mark my Bible tonight, so I'm just going to go off the screen. Look over to Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9, starting in the 57th verse. And we've read this passage many, many times when we talk about priorities. And really, that's what it comes down to, is what is our priority? In Luke chapter 9, starting verse 57, it says, "Now it happened as they journeyed on the road, that someone said to him, 'Lord, I will follow you wherever you go.' And Jesus said to him, 'Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head.' Then he said to another, 'Follow me.' But he said, 'Lord, let me first go and bury my father.' Jesus said, 'Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God.' And another also said, 'Lord, I'll follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell who are at my house.' But Jesus said to him, 'No one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God.'" Now, Jesus isn't being mean here. You know, when the guy says, "Well, let me go bury my father," that was a way of saying, well, listen, I need to take care of my parents. They need to be my priority right now. And then I'll get around to taking care of you. His father may have lived another 10, 15, 20 years. When the guy's telling him, you know, let me go back first and tell my family goodbye. Jesus knows the heart of people. Okay, I'll go tell my family, well, okay, I'll stay with you just a few more days, Mom. Okay, a week or two. All right. Jesus knows where their heart's at. And what he's talking about here is the priorities that they have. And he says the number one priority that we have to have is him. And if there's anything else that's going to interfere with that, anything else that's going to drag that down or weight it down, then we got to cast it off. And we've got to get rid of it. And that sounds harsh, but at the same time, it's not, because that's our call as Christians. It's the most important thing that has to be in our life, is Jesus Christ. So then he goes on from that, and here's the and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And I love the way that the author writes that, because it's not hard to sin, is it?
No.
I mean, it's really not that hard. As a matter of fact, it's pretty easy. I mean, that's why we all fall so often. I mean, it's easy to do. And the more we let it, the more it entangles us. And when it comes right down to it, you know, the devil's pretty tricky. And he is very good at what he does. And you can't, like I said a little while ago, you can divide that out, and you can say, get rid of the weights that are weighing us down and the sin. But you know what? The devil will use some of those weights that inherently there's nothing wrong with them to get us away from God. He is very tricky, and he'll entangle us. He'll lay traps for us all the time. And that's 1 Peter chapter 5, which if you've been hearing me preach or teach for any amount of time, you've heard this, because this is my favorite descriptive of the devil in the Bible. 1 Peter chapter 5, starting verse 8, "Be sober and vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world." That sin that so easily entangles, Satan lays traps all the time. And this is such a great descriptive, because when it talks about him being like a roaring lion, every one of us have watched those wildlife shows. Maybe some of y'all have been on a safari and actually got to see a lion in person. But have you ever, in the wildlife shows, you see those lions? They got all the patience in the world. They'll spend hours sneaking up on a gazelle. And they'll wait for that gazelle to get away from the crowd, away from the herd, and they'll move an inch or two, move an inch or two, move an inch or two. They take all the time in the world. They sneak up and they snatch them, and they're gone. And I love this descriptive, because that is exactly what Satan does. If we are not vigilant, as he says here, be sober and vigilant, because the adversary is sneaking up on us all the time. And over here in Hebrews, whenever he says that, he says, listen, we got to cast off all the weights and that sin that so easily entangles, because Satan's good. He is good at what he does. Don't ever shortchange Satan for what he does. He's been doing it a long time, folks. He says, "And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So that word endurance literally means to persevere, to endure, to finish. We don't want to get in this race with the idea that, well, I'm just going to run halfway through, do we? This is a race that we run to the end, and we need to persevere. We need to endure in this race. And I went through and looked at Paul's letters, and, was talking about we don't know for sure who the author of Hebrews is, but Paul, at least 5 other times in the New Testament, uses a race as a metaphor for the life that we're living for Christ and heading to the finish line. One of the best is over in 1 Corinthians. Look over to 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 24. Paul writes there, he says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it." Have you ever known anybody that ran in a track meet that ran to lose? I mean, really? If they're running in a track meet, if you go to the Olympics, do you think those Olympic sprinters and those Olympic distance runners, they all get up there, and when the gun goes off, they're like, well, I got in this to lose. So I'm just going to kind of like, Paul says, no, when they go in, they all run the race to win the prize, and only one gets it. He says, everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now, they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we do it for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. So he says, I got to focus in this run that I'm running. And we all need to have a focus in this run. Nobody gets into a race to lose it. And he said when they get in a race to run it, and he's using great imagery here because the Grecian games and everything, this was a big deal. The Romans were real big. They had their Colosseums and they had their circuses. And when I'm talking about circuses, I'm not talking about clowns and elephants in their circuses. What I'm talking about is they had athletic competitions in these stadiums. It was huge. It was a big deal. And he's using a great illustration here. He's saying, you see those athletes when they go down there and they get ready to run. They go down there and they get ready to compete. They do it with one thing in mind. And that's to win. That's to get to the end of the line. And he says, I do the same thing, and we need to all do that. And he says, I'm not doing it aimlessly. I don't just beat the air, but I subject my body. The way he puts it in there, he said, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. Have you got a King James? Has anybody in here got a King James? What's it say in the King James Version there? Are you there?
Yeah.
In verse 27. Doesn't it say buffets or beats or?
Into subjection, that by any means.
Oh, okay. I may be thinking of another place. But where he buffets his body. But he brings it into subjection. He says, listen, we're going to run this race. You better be running it to finish it. And you've got to run it in such a manner as you want to get across the finish line. Hey, Scott.
Well, the beauty of it is we all can win.
Yes.
We're not competing against
each other.
That would be a normal race.
Yeah.
God says, if you do everything I tell you to win.
Yeah. Then you've got it. Yeah. And that's run this race with endurance, with the idea that you're running the race to the finish, that you're running the race to the end. And that's what Paul says in here. He says, they're doing it so that one person can get a crown. We're doing it so that we can get a crown that lasts forever. And that's a great point, Scott. We're not racing against each other. Paul's using that as an illustration, but we're racing to get the crown at the end of the race.
One of the things I always try to remember, Ben, is that as Christians, we can't give up. We can't give in. And we can't quit. Because the minute we do any one of those three, we take our eye off the prize of being in heaven with God and Jesus and with our brothers and sisters that have gone on before us.
Yep.
So we would not have, we just can't quit. We can't quit running the race.
No.
We have to keep attending services. We have to keep studying the Bible. We have to keep trying to be the best example of Christ we each individually
Yeah.
can be.
I was talking about that very thing with another minister here just about 2 weeks ago. I said, the Christian life is not, you cannot be a stagnant Christian.
No.
You cannot
No,
be.
you can't.
You can't just say, well, I've kind of plateaued out here. I'm just going to tread water here until Jesus comes back. Because if you're just treading water, you're sinking. And if you're not going forward, you're going backward. There's no such thing as just a stagnant Christian. So you're going to be going one direction or the other, and you better be enduring through the race to get to the end. And yeah, that's all good stuff. And this, what Brother Bob just said over here in verse 2 of Hebrews 12. Looking unto Jesus, where's our focus going to be? What are we focusing on when we race? If you watch those Olympic racers, you don't never see an Olympic racer running and looking back over his shoulder.
No.
What he's looking at, or she's looking at, is the finish line. Because every time you turn around and look over your shoulder, you're going to lose a tenth of a second. And they know that. They know it. It's going to throw you off. It's going to throw you off stride. It's going to throw you off track. You got to focus. Looking unto Jesus. So we've got to keep our focus. I remember, I've told y'all this before, but it's probably been a long time. When my beautiful bride was pregnant with our daughter, we took Lamaze classes, and I don't guess those are even a thing anymore. Nowadays, those don't even happen. But back in the day, that was a big thing. You took Lamaze classes, you paid money, and you went to a class to learn how to do something that women have been doing for 5,000 years. But one of the things that they taught us in there was a focal point. And they kept saying, get something, take something with you into the labor and delivery room that you can practice with at home, and then take it in there. That will be your focal point. Even if it's just a rubber duck or something. When you're at home, practice your breathing techniques, staring at your rubber duck, or find something in the labor room that you can focus on. And husbands, your job is to help them keep on their focal point. And man, I remember when Brenda was about 30 minutes out from having Amber, and she was clawing them blankets, and she was, ah! And I got down right in her face, and I said, honey, what's your focal point? Well, I'll tell you what, it wasn't me. It was get out of my face. But we got to have, our focus has to be on Jesus Christ. Looking unto Jesus. There's the finish line. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. And I love this, because the author and the finisher, that word author in the Greek literally means beginning, originator, founder, leader. And it covers, there were so many descriptives in the Greek of this particular word that's used right here that New King James says author. What does it say in the NIV there, Craig? In 12:2.
Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer.
The pioneer. Oh, the perfecter. Yeah. Okay. So the Greek there has a whole list of things, but they all come back to the beginning, the originator, the founder, the leader. That's who we're focusing on. He is the founder and the leader and the beginning of our faith. I mean, and it's also the root word in the Greek for chief priest. When you go back through the New Testament, you see the word chief priest in there. Guess what? It is very close to this word author in the Greek, because they share the same. They share the same root word. So it's the leader, the originator, the beginning, the founder, the chief priest, the captain. All of those things are descriptive of that word. And then the finisher literally means to complete, accomplish, make perfect, or finish. So Jesus Christ is the source and the completion of our faith, isn't he? He's the beginning and the end. He's the start and he's the finish. And he perfects that faith because he was the perfect sacrifice who lived his life perfectly and completed everything. What was it that he said at the cross? The last 3 words he said on the cross. It is finished. It's been completed. It's been perfected. It's been done. I put this into place. I put this plan into place. 3,000 years ago in the garden. Well, even before that, but, it kicked in the garden. And 3,000 years later, hanging on the cross, he said, it is finished. It's been completed. It's been perfected. I put it in, I originated it, I finished it. And now you follow him and focus on him as the originator, the perfecter, and the completer of our faith. Look over the book of Philippians. Look over Philippians, the first chapter. Philippians chapter 1. A couple verses over there. Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 3. Paul writes in Philippians 1, verse 3, he says, I thank my God upon every remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine, making request for you with all joy, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Who is the founder of our faith? Jesus Christ. Who's going to be the finisher of it? Who completed everything for us? Jesus Christ. And that's who we concentrate on. That's who we focus on. And that's who we look towards. So when he says that, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. And in that second verse, he goes on from there and he says, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus knew the joy set before him, and therefore he endured all that he went through. I mean, think about what Jesus went through. Could Jesus have done that if he was not focused on the end game? If he wasn't focused on the finality of things and what was ultimately going to happen? I mean, he was struggling with it in the garden on that last night when he was praying to his Father. If there's any way you can take this cup, but your will be done. I will be obedient to you all the way through. And Jesus knew, when I get through this, there's going to be great joy because this is going to spread throughout the world. And it's going to reconcile my people back to me. And we're called to follow in his steps, are we not? We're called to follow in his steps. So when you look at this, that verse 2, he says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So, yes, sir.
A lot of times as we go through life, each day or often, something will come up that to us at the time will seem like this is the biggest thing there is. But no, whatever it is, it may be big. It may be something that alters your life.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to keep in mind, fix our eyes on Jesus. And
Yep.
like it says here, Jesus, before the joy, had a joy in his mind and his heart, that he, instead of scorning the shame of the cross, if I would have that cross and all that involved, that would be my focus.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
we're called to keep our focus on what is determined what we're doing all this for.
Yeah.
And not let those things, however
If-
what they are,
If we get our focus off, we get weighed down, don't
our
we?
eyes off of
Yeah.
the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we have to keep that focus on him. Look what Paul told Timothy over in 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy, the second chapter. 2 Timothy, the second chapter, starting in the 8th verse. Paul writes to Timothy over there, he says, remember that Jesus Christ of the seed of David was raised from the dead according to my gospel, for which I suffered trouble as an evildoer, even to the point of chains. But the word of God is not chained. Therefore, I endure all things for the sake of the elect, that they may also obtain the salvation which is in Christ Jesus with eternal glory. For this is a faithful saying, for if we died with him, we shall also live with him. If we endure, we shall also reign with him. It's keeping our focus and our eyes on the goal and running the race with endurance and knowing the way that Jesus did. Jesus was obedient. He followed the Father's guidelines. He did what he was asked to do, and he kept his focus on that. And that's how I can say, over there where it says, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Because he didn't lose his focus. We don't lose our focus. A faithful saying, if we died with him, we'll also live with him. If we endure, we'll also reign with him. So when the author is writing this, he's telling them, listen, we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. All of these that I've talked about, all of them that I didn't even have time to talk about, all of them that may have not got mentioned, who gave this great testimony of their faith in what they did. And the greatest of all of those is Jesus Christ and what he did and the faithfulness that he showed. And he did it knowing that there was going to be a day that he would sit down at the right hand of God. And we run the race focused on him, looking towards that end, knowing that there'll come a day when all of this is done and we step into an eternity with him. So, verse 3, he says, for consider him, and this is carrying with the same theme that we just had in verse 2, for consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Think about what Jesus went through. Think about what Jesus faced. Consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. If you start thinking you can't do it, think about what Jesus went through. Think about how he handled it. You know, and sometimes we get into a position where it's like, well, I just can't do this. Think about what he went through when we start to feel defeated. And think about how he handled it. What did he do? That last night he went to his Father. Hanging on the cross, he went to his Father. And he never lost focus. He always stayed focused. So remember what he went through. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I wish I'd have been thinking, I actually just plugged this into this PowerPoint this afternoon. Wish I'd have been thinking I'd have told Craig to lead this song. You know the song Follow Me? This is one of my favorite songs. And you know why? It humbles me every time we sing it. So I traveled down a lonely road and no one seemed to care. The burden on my weary back had bowed me to despair. I often complained to Jesus how folks were treating me. And then I heard him say so tenderly, my feet were also weary upon the Calvary road. The cross became so heavy, I fell beneath the load. Be faithful, weary pilgrim, the morning I can see, just lift your cross and follow close to me. I work so hard for Jesus, I often boast and say, I've sacrificed a lot of things to walk the narrow way. I gave up fame and fortune, I'm worth a lot to thee. And then I hear him gently say to me, I left the throne of glory. I counted it but loss. My hands were nailed in anger upon a cruel cross. But now we'll make the journey with your hand safe in mine. So lift your cross and follow close to me. Yes. Oh, Jesus, if I die upon a foreign field someday, 'twould be no more than love demands, no less that I could repay. No greater love hath mortal man than for a friend to die. These are the words he gently spoke to me. If just a cup of water I place within your hand, then just a cup of water is all I demand. But if by death to living they can thy glory see, I'll take my cross and follow close to thee. Yes. I love this song. And every time we sing it, it humbles me. Because it's like, you know, we could get ourselves all built up. We can do everything in this song. We can say, I just don't think I can do it anymore. Do you know how hard it is being a Christian? Do you know how difficult it is in the United States of America today, Jesus, to be a Christian? I mean, it's really hard. And then you get to that second verse there, or the chorus there, you know, and he's saying, yeah, I know. Amen. It was pretty rough on me carrying that cross down that road.
Ben, I've had the opportunity to spend 12 years overseas in my military service. And well, it's not tough being a Christian in the United States.
No. Oh, no.
Brother, let me tell you.
That was sarcasm when I was...
Let me tell you, it is death to be Christians in a lot of the countries around.
There are countries where you will die for being a Christian. Yeah.
They're still martyring Christians today.
That's right. To this day, there's people dying simply for being Christians.
In the first few verses of that song, you can tell that the person singing that has an eye problem. It's all about me.
The eye problem is I.
I do this, I do that, I do this.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a great talent for you.
Yeah, yeah.
How come you're not appreciative of me?
Yeah, yep, yeah. I love the song because it humbles us.
Absolutely.
But that, this passage over here when he says, "Consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls." When you start getting worn down, remember what he went through. And he ties it right over here in verse 4. He says, "You've not yet resisted the bloodshed striving against sin." He contrasts their struggles with Jesus's. Now that's not to say that they're not going to, suffer greatly. The early church suffered horrendously.
Yes.
Whoever wrote this, if it was the Apostle Paul that wrote this, he wound up, being beheaded. I mean, the early church, they shed their blood for the cause. But when he writes this, he says, listen, you've not yet resisted the bloodshedding, striving against your sin. He said, you haven't paid anything for this yet. And he contrasts that struggle, and this sets it up for the next section of the letter. Because he's going to make a change here. There's a transition that's happening right here in this verse. Because he's talking to them about, listen, you're getting wore down, you're getting wore out. Remember in the context, you're thinking about giving this up to go back to that. And he says, remember what Jesus went through. When you think this is hard, think about what Jesus went through. And he said, you haven't even got to the point yet where you shed any blood for your sin, or had any problems with this. And it sets up the next section of this letter, verse 5, where he says, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons. Remember context. He's writing this to these Jewish Christians who are thinking about going back. So he's going to use some of the old to remind them of something very important here. That all of them, as Jews, knew this that he says next. He's going to remind them of something that all of them as Jews had heard from the old. And that's this next passage, verse 5 and 6. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. That comes from Proverbs 3, verses 11 and 12. That little passage right there, if you take that out of context and just read it yourself, that's, somebody would say, well, there's that mean God, that all he wants to do is chasten and scourge and whip and punish.
But he's not a mean God. He's a loving Father.
He's a loving Father, and that's exactly why he says, as sons, you have forgotten what he said to you as his sons. And that word chastening literally means to discipline, to instruct, to train, and to teach.
Yes.
Some of the best instruction, training, and teaching comes out of difficulties, does it not? You don't learn very well unless you fall every now and then. You don't learn very well unless you have problems. Difficulties, train, teach, instruct, strengthen. And when the author of Hebrews is doing this, he's saying, listen, you're giving up on a little bit of difficulty here, and you're fixing to throw in the towel and turn around and go back the other direction. He says, God instructs us, he trains us, he disciplines us, he teaches us through the difficulties that we face. And that's the point of him bringing that up. And that word rebuked, when he says he rebukes those that he loves, literally means to convict or correct. And when he's talking about chastening, he's saying, listen, God teaches, instructs, and trains his people. And what he does is he convicts them and he gets them back on the correct path again. And sometimes it takes pain in order to have that happen. And when he's writing that to them, God doesn't tempt us. We've talked about this many times. God doesn't tempt us, but he does test. We all face tests in this life, and they were being tested at this point. They were like, is this the route we want to go? Do we want to face the problems of being a Christian? It would be a whole lot easier just to go back to what it was before.
But with his testing, he provides us the answer.
He always gives
us the way out.
He always gives us the way out. That's what James said. You know, don't ever say that he's tempting. He doesn't tempt anybody. But when we are tempted by our own evil desires, he always gives us a way out. And when we come out of it, we're stronger than we were when we went in. Every time. And that's exactly what the author is saying about over here. Now, how was Jesus made perfect? Now, that's kind of a trick question because, you know, well, he's the Son of God, so he was perfect. But was he not fully human too? As being fully human, did he not have the propensity to have flaws that he could have possibly sinned?
Yes.
That's the whole point of the temptation.
That's the whole purpose.
Yeah. So, yeah, as a human, he has it. But how was he made perfect? Look back to Hebrews chapter 2, where we started this thing way back in January. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 10. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things and by whom all are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through suffering.
Yes.
Jesus was perfected in his human form through suffering. And if you look over to Hebrews chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, it says, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Even Jesus had to go through the fire. And that's the point that the author of Hebrews is making here. Even Jesus had to go through the fire. And if he had to go through the fire, we're going to have to go through the fire. And what you need to do is you need to focus on him. You need to run the race with endurance to finish the race. You need to remember what he went through when you're facing the difficulties and the trials and temptations. And remember, you know, God doesn't tempt us, but he'll test us. We'll be put in positions where we're tested, and he will have a way for us to get out, and we'll always come out stronger than we went in.
Yes.
It's all part of the perfecting of us. And we'll never be perfect. We'll never be perfect people in this life. As long as we're drawing breath in these bodies, we're going to fail and we're going to fall and we're going to sin and we're going to mess up and we're going to make mistakes. But, you know, like I said Sunday morning, there's no condemnation in Christ. If we've come to him, he's covered us. He's made us perfect in the sense that, you know what? He's taken care of all of that. We just get back to him and say, I'm sorry now, I got to get back in the race again. And I got to get back on track again. And that's what we do. So, Hebrews 12, 1 through 6. We have a legacy that's been handed down to us from heroes of faith. And it's not just the ones that are listed in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11 lists all those greats of faith of the Old Testament. I tell you what, we got a whole stack of them in the New Testament. We got a whole stack of early church fathers who gave their lives that aren't even in the Bible. We are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses who lived their lives faithfully regardless of what they had to face. And it's been handed down to us to do the same. So we lay aside every weight and every sin, and we run with endurance focused on Jesus. He's the start and the finisher of our faith. He was at the starting line, and guess what? He's going to be standing at the ending, at the finish line when we cut through the tape. Remember what he went through when we face challenges. And you know what? Every now and I do think of that every now and then when I'll do something. I don't do it very often, but when I do something stupid at home and I break something, or I fall off the roof, or I have a tree limb fall on my head or something like that. And I'm like, and then I think, this is minor. You know what? The tree limb hit me on the head and bounced off. This is minor. Jesus had a crown of thorns with 3-inch spikes on it, crammed down on his head. This is minor, what I'm going through. Remember what he went through when we face challenges. Yes.
Broken of his flesh from the
all
body.
the way. And the tests of this world strengthen us, and they lead us to that final perfection. Because we will be made perfect someday. Not in this life, but we're running the race, focused on Him, with endurance, to cross the finish line.